of the Life of Frederick Douglass, Chapter 13. At the close of the year 1834, Freeland again hired me from Thomas Old to work through the year 1835. But by this time, I began to want to live upon Freeland as well as with Freeland. I was no longer content to live with him or any other slaveholder. I began to prepare myself for a final struggle which should decide my fate one way or the other. I was nearly a grown man. Year after year had passed, and I was still a slave. These thoughts burned within me. I knew I must do something. I therefore resolved that 1835 should not pass without my making an attempt to become free. But I was not willing to cherish this determination alone. My fellow slaves were dear to me. I wanted them to share with me this life-giving hope. I therefore, though very carefully, began to determine their views and feelings in regard to their condition, and to plant in their minds thoughts of freedom. I thought of ways we might escape, and, meanwhile, worked whenever I could to convince them of the fraud and inhumanity of slavery. I went first to Henry, next to John, then to the others. I found in them all warm hearts and noble spirits. They were ready to hear and ready to act when a practical plan should be proposed. This was what I wanted. I talked to them about how slavery robbed us of our manhood if we gave in to our enslavement without at least one effort to be free. We met often and talked frequently, and shared our hopes and fears, and described the difficulties, real and imagined, which we might meet. At times we were tempted to give up and try to be content with our wretched lives. At others we were firm and unbending in our determination to go. Whenever we suggested any plan, there was hesitation. The odds against us were fearful. Our path was littered with great obstacles, and, if we succeeded in escaping, our right to be free was still in question. We could be seized and returned to slavery. We could see no spot this side of the ocean where we could be free. We knew nothing about Canada. Our knowledge of the North did not extend farther than New York, and it was horrible to imagine reaching there and being harassed forever with the prospect of being returned to slavery. On the one hand, we saw slavery, a stern reality, but one that we knew. On the other hand, back in the dim distance, stood a doubtful freedom, beckoning us to come and share its hospitality. When we let ourselves imagine the road that stood between us and that freedom, we were frequently horrified. We saw ourselves being overtaken and torn to pieces by the fangs of the terrible bloodhound. We were stung by scorpions, chased by wild beasts, bitten by snakes, and finally, after having nearly reached the desired spot, after swimming rivers, encountering wild animals, sleeping in the woods, suffering hunger and nakedness, we were caught by our pursuers, and, when we resisted, shot dead upon the spot. As I say, this picture sometimes terrified us, and made us think it might be better to put up with the evil we knew than run to an evil we did not. In coming to a firm decision to run away, we did more than Patrick Henry when he said, "Give me liberty or give me death." With us, it was a doubtful liberty at most, and almost certain death if we failed. But for my part, I preferred death to hopeless bondage. One of us, Sandy, gave up the idea of running away, but still encouraged us. Our group then consisted of Henry Harris, John Harris, Henry Bailey, Charles Roberts, and myself. Henry Bailey was my uncle and belonged to Thomas Old. Charles had married my aunt and belonged to my master's father-in-law, William Hamilton. The plan we finally decided on was this. We would get a large canoe belonging to Hamilton, and on the Saturday night before Easter, paddle directly up the Chesapeake Bay. When we reached the head of the bay, 70 or 80 miles from where we lived, we planned to abandon the canoe. We would then walk, following the guidance of the North Star, until we got beyond the limits of Maryland. Traveling by water, we reasoned, we would look less like runaways than like fishermen. If we should travel by land, we would be questioned every step of the way. Anyone having a white face could stop us and demand that we explain ourselves. The week before our intended start, I wrote several documents, one for each of us. As well as I can remember, they read like this. This is to certify that I, the undersigned, have given the bearer, my servant, full liberty to go to Baltimore to spend the Easter holidays. Written with my own hand this day in 1835. William Hamilton, near St. Michael's, Talbot County, Maryland. We were not going to Baltimore, but in going up the bay, we went toward Baltimore. As the time approached for our departure, our anxiety became more and more intense. It was truly a matter of life and death for us. At this time, I was very active in explaining every difficulty, removing every doubt, and calming every fear. I assured my friends that the battle was half won the instant we made the move. We had talked long enough. We were now ready for action. If we were not ready now, we never would be. And if we did not move now, we might as well sit down and admit we were only fit to be slaves. And this, none of us were prepared to acknowledge. Every man stood firm. At our last meeting, we pledged in the most solemn manner that at the appointed time we would certainly start in pursuit of freedom. This was in the middle of the week, and we were to leave Saturday night. We went, as usual, to our different workplaces, our minds reeling with thoughts of our hazardous undertaking. We tried to conceal our feelings as much as possible, and I think we succeeded very well. After a painful waiting, Saturday morning came. I greeted it with joy, no matter what sadness it might bring. Friday night had been a sleepless one for me. I probably felt more anxious than the rest because I was considered the leader of the whole affair. The responsibility of success or failure lay heavily upon me. The first 2 hours of that morning were such as I never experienced before and hope never to again. Early in the morning, we went as usual to the field. We were spreading manure. All at once, as I worked, I was overwhelmed with an indescribable feeling. I turned to Sandy, who was nearby, and said, "We are betrayed." "I just had the same thought," he said. We said no more. I was never more certain of anything. The horn was blown as usual, and we went up to the house for breakfast. Just as I got to the house, I saw 4 white men and 2 colored men in the lane. The white men were on horseback, and the colored ones were walking behind, as if tied. I watched them a few moments until they reached our lane gate. Here they stopped and tied the colored men to the gatepost. In a few moments, in rode Hamilton, looking highly excited. He asked if Freeland was in, and rode up to the barn with extraordinary speed to find him. In a few moments, he and Freeland returned to the house. By this time, the 3 local police officers arrived. After talking a while, they all walked up to the kitchen door. There was no one in the kitchen but myself and John. Henry and Sandy were up at the barn. Freeland called me, saying there were some gentlemen at the door who wished to see me. I stepped to the door and asked what they wanted. They instantly seized me, tying my hands. I insisted upon knowing what the matter was. They finally said that they had learned I had been in a scrape, and that I was to be questioned before my master. If their information proved false, they said, I should not be hurt. In a few moments they succeeded in tying John. Then they turned to Henry, who had by this time returned, and commanded him to cross his hands. "I won't," said Henry in a firm tone. "Won't you?" one law officer said. "No, I won't," said Henry in a still stronger tone. With this, 2 of the officers pulled out their shining pistols and swore that they would make him cross his hands or kill him. Each cocked his pistol. With fingers on the trigger, they walked up to Henry, saying that if he did not cross his hands, they would blow his heart out. "Shoot me, said Henry. "You can't kill me but once. Shoot, shoot!" "And I won't be tied." This he said in a tone of loud defiance. At the same time, with a motion as quick as lightning, he struck the pistols from the hand of each officer. The officers fell upon him, and, after beating him, they finally overpowered him and got him tied. During the scuffle, I managed to get my forged pass out and put it in the fire. We were all now tied. And just as we were to leave for Easton jail, Freeland's mother came to the door with her hands full of biscuits. She divided them between Henry and John, and then spoke to me, saying, "You devil, you yellow devil, it was you that put that into the heads of Henry and John to run away. If it wasn't for you, you long-legged mulatto devil, Henry and John would never have thought of such a thing." I did not answer, and was immediately hurried off toward St. Michael's. A moment before the scuffle with Henry, Hamilton had suggested that we be searched for the forged papers he understood I had written. But just before that search could take place, his help was needed in helping to tie Henry. In the excitement of the next few moments, they either forgot to search us or decided it was unsafe to do so. So as yet, they had no proof against us. When we got about halfway to St. Michael's, Henry managed to quietly ask me what he should do with his pass. I told him to eat it with his biscuit and to admit nothing. We passed the word around, admit nothing. Our confidence in each other was shaken. We had decided to succeed or fail together, and after this calamity, we felt the same. We were now prepared for anything. When we reached St. Michael's, we underwent a sort of examination. We all denied that we ever intended to run away. We did this more to bring out the evidence against us than from any hope of being believed. We learned that the evidence against us came from one person. Our master would not tell who it was, but we felt certain that we knew. We were sent off to the jail in Easton, where we were put into the sheriff's hands. Henry, John, and I were placed in one room together, and Charles and Henry Bailey in another. We had been in jail scarcely 20 minutes when a swarm of slave traders flocked in to look at us. Such a set of beings I never saw before. I felt I was surrounded by so many fiends from hell. They laughed and grinned at us, saying, "Ah, my boys, we have got you, haven't we?" After taunting us, they began to examine us, trying to determine our value. They rudely laughed at us, asking if we would not like to have them for our masters. We would not answer them. Then they cursed and swore at us, telling us that they could take the devil out of us in a very little while if we were only in their hands. Jail was more comfortable than we expected. We did not get much to eat, nor was the food very good, but we had a good clean room, and we could see out the windows into the street. Upon the whole, we got along very well, so far as the jail and its keeper were concerned. Immediately after Easter, to our surprise, Hamilton and Freeland came up to Easton and took Charles, the two Henrys, and John out of jail and went home with them, leaving me alone. This separation caused me more pain than anything else in the whole episode. I suppose that Hamilton and Freeland had talked together and had decided that as I was the ringleader, they would take the others home and sell me as a warning to those that remained. I was now left to my fate. I was all alone and within the walls of a stone prison. Only a few days before, I was full of hope. I expected to have been safe in a land of freedom, but now I was sunk down to the utmost despair. I thought the possibility of freedom was gone. I was kept in this way about 1 week, but at the end of that time, to my utter astonishment, Thomas Old arrived and took me out. He intended to send me to Alabama with a gentleman he knew, but for some reason he did not send me to Alabama. He decided instead to send me back to Baltimore to live again with his brother Hugh and to learn a trade. Thus, after an absence of 3 years and 1 month, I once more returned to my old home in Baltimore.